Casey McCann had always been a man of conviction. From a young age, he had been drawn to causes that others often found too complex, too controversial, or too dangerous. His most defining mission was fighting against the pervasive reach of cults, specifically those that preyed on vulnerable individuals. It was a personal battle for him, born from his own experiences. Years ago, he had fallen under the influence of a manipulative group. He had lost friends, nearly lost his identity, and it had taken years to untangle himself from its hold. That time, though painful, sparked a relentless drive in Casey to prevent others from falling into the same trap. He became an anti-cult activist, using his voice, his platform, and his life to expose the tactics of manipulation and mind control. By 2000, Casey was living in São Paulo, Brazil, a city that had both welcomed and warned him. In his late 50s, he was well known in activist circles, respected for his unyielding stance against groups that sought to control their followers, often with devastating results. He had helped countless people reclaim their lives from the grip of cults, and his research was often cited by experts across the world. But it was also dangerous work, too dangerous for some, perhaps. Casey had been living in a modest apartment on the outskirts of the bustling city. The apartment was unassuming, tucked away from the tourist areas, and the perfect place for him to continue his work in peace, or so he thought. He had spent most of the evening working on his latest project, compiling evidence of a dangerous new cult operating in the city. The group was rapidly expanding, and Casey's exposure of their methods had already made him a target. On the night of February 26, 2000, Casey had just returned from a meeting with fellow activists. He'd been discussing a breakthrough in his investigation into the cult's operations, but he was also aware that the stakes were getting higher. There had been increasing threats against him, warnings that it might be time to step away. But Casey wasn't one to retreat. He was determined to finish what he had started. That evening, as he sat alone in his apartment, poring over notes and scribbled observations, he never saw it coming. There were no phone calls, no knocks at the door. The silence of his apartment was shattered only by the unexpected intrusion. In a city as large and chaotic as São Paulo, it was hard to predict when violence would strike. But someone had found him, and this time, they were determined to silence him forever. Casey was murdered that night, his life extinguished in a way that seemed all too fitting for the kind of dangerous work he had undertaken. The details of his death were grim, his body discovered the next morning by a concerned friend who had tried to reach him, but with no answer. When the authorities arrived, there was little evidence to point to the killers. The scene had been cleaned, almost as if they wanted to leave no trace behind. No clear motives were established immediately, but to those who knew Casey, it was clear that his activism had made him a target. For days, the investigation seemed to stall. The police in São Paulo were faced with the complexity of the case, unsure whether the murder was the result of a personal vendetta, a botched robbery, or, as many suspected, the work of those whose secrets Casey had been trying to expose. It was the latter theory that resonated most with his friends and colleagues. Casey had made many enemies over the years. His work had rattled powerful organizations, cult leaders who had seen their grip on people slipping away because of his efforts. He had been relentless in his mission, but that same relentlessness had attracted dangerous attention. Some believed that his exposure of the cult in São Paulo had put him squarely in the crosshairs of those who would do anything to keep their operations hidden. In the weeks following his murder, his friends and fellow activists held vigils, demanding justice and pledging to continue his work. Casey's death was a stark reminder of the personal risks many in the anti-cult movement faced, and it sparked an outpouring of support for his cause. His family, though devastated, vowed to carry on his legacy, continuing the work he had started, despite the fear that now lingered in the shadows. The truth of what happened to Casey McCann was never fully revealed. The investigation continued to drift into obscurity, and no suspects were ever apprehended. The authorities had their theories, but without concrete evidence, the case remained cold. Some believed that the cult he had been investigating had played a role, others thought it might have been a more personal issue that led to his death. But one thing was certain: someone wanted him silenced, and they had succeeded. Casey McCann's murder left a hole in the anti-cult movement. His death was a painful reminder of the stakes involved in confronting powerful, shadowy organizations, but his work lived on. His writings, his speeches, and the countless lives he had touched remained a testament to his dedication. His legacy would continue to inspire future generations to stand up against manipulation and abuse, no matter the cost. The streets of São Paulo were as crowded as ever, but for those who knew Casey McCann and understood the price of his fight, the city would forever hold the weight of his tragic, untimely death.